Good evening from Washington, D.C. I am Dorothy Moss, Curator of Painting and Sculpture at the National Portrait Gallery and Coordinating Curator of the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative. I am so pleased to welcome you all tonight to a special event sponsored by the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative in partnership with the National Portrait Gallery, featuring New York-based artist Maren Hassinger, who is with us live tonight. Although we're getting together from different places, we acknowledge that in the United States, we all stand on native land in a country still shaped by a history of slavery and by racism. We gratefully acknowledge those who have come before us and those who continue to fight injustice today. For some technical logistics, we recommend that you select a gallery, active speaker, or thumbnail view in the top right corner of your screen in order to better see our panelists and the presentation. We have live closed captioning available, which can be accessed along the bottom menu, as can the question and answer function, into which you are welcome to submit questions to be answered during the second half of this event. In the non-virtual world, the National Portrait Gallery is excited to be reopened to the public. So if you are in the Washington, D.C. area, we encourage you to reserve a free timed entry pass on our website. Born in 1947, Maren Hassinger came of age as an artist in the avant-garde of Los Angeles in the 1970s. Her work spans sculpture, video, performance, and public art. In the mid-1990s, Hassinger became head of the Reinhardt School of Sculpture at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. Her work is held in the permanent collections of major institutions in Baltimore, Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, New York, and in Washington, D.C. Next weekend, she and several socially distanced volunteers will install a public work titled Monument in Washington, D.C.'s Dupont Circle neighborhood. The project, originally commissioned by the Studio Museum in Harlem, is sponsored by the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative and the Golden Triangle Business District. We are delighted that Maren Hassinger is the 11th invited artist to perform a commissioned work as part of the Portrait Gallery's Identify series dedicated to performance art. Although originally scheduled for this spring, Maren Hassinger's live performance will now take place next spring. Her performance, Birthright, is based on the short video of the same title that we will view together tonight. The video documents Hassinger meeting her uncle for the very first time and learning about her father's family history. Please note that the video includes mention of her family's racial trauma that may be upsetting. Tonight's program is participatory. After the screening, Maren will teach us how to twist newspaper, something she also does during the video you're about to see. She will tell us more about the meaning behind this gesture, which is one that she uses throughout her practice. Please make sure that you have newspaper on hand. Charlotte Ickes, the National Portrait Gallery's Curator of Time-Based Media, Art, and Special Projects, will lead a discussion with Maren Hassinger after the screening.
Hi. Maren, are you there? Maren? There you are. Hi, how are you?
Here.
We're figuring it out.
Right.
Before we launch into the newspaper demonstration, I just want to thank Dorothy for the lovely introduction. And in addition to thanking the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative and the National Portrait Gallery, I'd really like to extend my gratitude to my colleagues in communications and the departments of AV and special events for helping to make this event happen. But most especially, I would like to thank you, Maren, for sharing this beautiful work with us tonight. It's a really special opportunity in advance of your installation next weekend here in DC and your rescheduled performance at the Portrait Gallery next spring. Thank you for allowing me to be in regular dialogue with you for now going on almost 6 years. So, without further ado, please grab your newspaper. I have the Metro section from the Washington Post from Tuesday, October 6, 2020, from one of my neighbors. And Maren will kind of walk us through how she twists newspaper, which you see throughout the video. And then once we all get the hang of it, Maren and I will start talking about the work you just saw. So it's all you, Maren. Thank you.
Well, you've got your paper. This is an entire sheet. So the first thing is to divide that sheet. So it's 2 smaller sheets. Okay, put one in your lap. And then you're gonna make, I guess it's a couple of inches. You're gonna make strips that are about a column width wide. Yeah. Let's see, here's a column over here. So you're gonna tear it down 4 times. It's gonna make 5 lengths. And then when you finish with that one, you might as well start on the other one, the other half. Again, about 1 column width wide. And you're going to do it 4 times. Okay. So now you've got this. So it's time to start twisting. And some people may be wondering, why are we doing this? Well, I found this to be a building block for sculpture. And I found something poetic in the fact that it's the New York Times, which is the paper of record for the country, and which has all kinds of stories about all kinds of people from all kinds of places. So it's kind of like the world is in your hands. So then just twisting one hand feeds the other hand. And it's like I'm actually twisting, I'm right-handed, and I'm twisting with my left hand and completing that twist with the right.
Well, I'm left.
I go on and do that through all of them. Through each singular strip that I've made, I'm going to do that. Now, are we going to do all of that right now on camera, or are we going to stop for a minute?
We can stop. We'll stop. You can.
Or we can keep twisting
keep
and
going.
keep talking. Yeah.
You can. I can't. I am not good at multitasking. Okay. So, but you know how to. You've been doing this for a while, so you can continue twisting. And I hope our virtual audience is as well. So, on that note, I'd love to actually talk a bit about this really tactile gesture that we see in Birthright, but we also see throughout your practice. And without revealing too much about the live performance next spring, and Birthright is really the basis for that performance, we'll, as an audience, collaboratively twist newspaper.
Yeah.
And so we're making a collaborative sculpture, which in some ways becomes the performance too.
Yeah.
And I think this tactile gesture is a really powerful one right now, because in the time of COVID, touch is either mediated or forbidden. And so I'd love for you to talk a bit about how you talked a bit about the times, but this actual really gesture of twisting and how it functions in the video and then throughout your practice.
Well, I think that what twisting does is it gives the paper more strength, you know, so that it can be used as an element in making actual sculptural things. Mm-hmm. But it's very, very important for me that the newspaper contains all of our lives. It's a newspaper with everybody in it. And by twisting these pieces and making them the elements of sculpture, and having us all do it together at the same time, it's me talking about, let's work together, let's be together, let's make things together, let's not be separate. We are one. That's what this is about for me. And that's what my practice basically has come down to, is that feeling that we are all related.
And you talked a bit, I know you studied fiber arts in graduate school at UCLA. So
Right.
this kind of tactile gesture and medium has been with you for quite some time. And when we talked, I guess a couple months ago now, at the beginning of quarantine, you mentioned twisting was almost like a moment to quiet ourselves. So not a form of escape or forgetting what's in the news, which is of course a vital source of information, but also can be a source of stress and anxiety.
Right.
So it's not a form of escapism, but this form of quieting ourselves. And I wonder, you talk about the worry beads. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that meditative gesture and why you incorporated it into the video.
Well, I was starting to make pieces like that at the time that we were shooting the video, and Donna Conlin, who was the videographer.
And I think she's here in our virtual audience.
Hi,
Donna.
She, I think she wanted to include other parts of my practice. It wasn't, I'm not wholly and fully a video artist. I make objects as well. And my performances aren't always documented on film or tape. So I think she wanted to include maybe, more of me in this discussion of my family. Yeah. And that's how we ended up with, coming to the studio and me turning on off the lights and, all this stuff, which were things that I was doing at the time on other pieces. Yeah. But this is a very quieting thing. It's like, like any other kind of, in quotes, women's work, crocheting, knitting, weaving, repetitive, and mind calming. Yeah.
And you're literally twisting time, the time of the news.
Right.
When the news is coming at us nonstop, this is a moment to slow down with it.
Yeah.
And in some ways,
other things.
Exactly. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a couple slides. I'm no tech whiz, so let's hope this works. Here we go. Hope everyone can see this PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And here you see Birthright installed at Art and Practice, and I was lucky enough to be able to see this remarkable show of Maren's work, The Spirit of Things. And it's installed, you see, your generic gallery seating, but also your sculptures, sit-upons made of newspapers, which I believe also functioned as gallery seating.
Right.
One could sit upon them. And
right.
So here you see the newspapers, the kind of sculptural element of your practice alluded to in the video, made into this larger installation. And you've long been working in sculpture and performance. As I mentioned, you studied fiber arts at UCLA, but you started making video in the 1990s. And you came to Birthright in 2005, that's when you made it. And to me, it stands out as one of, in your practice for many reasons, but also because it's one of the more narrative-based works of your practice.
Right.
And I'm curious how did you come to make this work? The kind of background of making this work, collaborating with Donna, collaborating with your uncle, and why you decided to not only document this, you know, intensely personal meeting, you're meeting your uncle for the first time, but why you decided to then make it into an artwork, make something singular into something shared.
Well, I guess, you know, I mean, at that point, my life was starting to get like, the artwork was my life. So it made sense to document things that I might have done prior that were, you know, more solitary or private or less social. It just became the time to really make everything art. You know, I kind of gave myself over to the practice of being an artist once and for all and finally. And so everything converged, you know, the history of my family, and you can see my children there. I'm explaining their history to them.
And Jesse, and I should point out, you also collaborate with your daughter Ava under the name Matriarch. So family is an important part of your larger practice.
Right, it is, but I mean, it's just that like there's no barriers anymore between what I do as a citizen and what I do as an artist. It's all mixed up together. And I have to say something about these sit-upons, which are stacked up. They're usually in stacks of maybe about 30 to 40. And you can actually sit on them and they're quite comfortable. And I learned how to make these in Campfire Girls. And Campfire Girls had an ideology of Native America. And so we made individual sit-upons when I was a child to sit on for our sing-alongs and our gatherings. And I decided to start making them again as an adult artist and using the times. So again, they became all about all of us, and they became a way that we could sit together socially. And it was kind of a wonderful coming together of minimalist sculpture and my history as a child. So
I read
it's all connected. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
I read an anecdote, maybe in an interview, when these were installed, I think at the Museum of Art and Design in New York. Correct me if I'm wrong, Maren. And,
yeah, that was it.
Yeah, and you had intended for visitors to be able to sit upon them, but there was a worry about, in terms of conservation.
Right.
And so you decided to come in and sit on them and sit in the gallery and greet visitors and tell them about it.
And then I would bring some former students or two. Yeah.
Can you talk a bit, I mean, you talk a bit about your family in the video, but just for our audience members, that was the first time you met your uncle and your aunt.
That's right, yep.
Pauline, and you didn't know about them for many years. I think you said you received Christmas cards from your uncle James, but didn't know he was your uncle.
Right, my father did not disclose his past.
Right. And so this is, again, you're really learning about your paternal side of the family for the first time and making it into an artwork.
Right.
I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about the title of the work. One word, Birthright, which of course is defined as a privilege or possession, a kind of inheritance entitled to by birth for an individual or a group of people. And we've talked about how you are thinking about inherited trauma in this video, and the quote unquote, as you say, feeling of being unloved. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about why that title and how it speaks to that kind of inheritance that you mentioned in the video.
I don't know, I guess, you know, everybody wants to know where they came from. And I was well aware of my mother's siblings and my cousins. And I never knew anything at all about my father. And then when I began to know about him, I found out that the woman he called Martha, who was, I thought, my grandmother, was not related to us by blood. She took care of him and raised him, but that was not his mother. And okay, that was pretty shocking to be learning something like that at age 40. And so I just decided to investigate more. And the only way to do it, because by this time, my grandmother had passed away, my father had passed away, and the only one I vaguely even knew about was my uncle. Mm-hmm. And my father had tried not to contact him either. And he kept sending these Christmas cards. And I remember my mother saying, well, who is this card from? It says it's from your brother. Who is this person? And I looked him up through other relatives of my father's who knew more about the history and the story. Mm-hmm. And that's how I found out. But I think it's really important to know your origins, and then finally to let go of the whole thing and realize your connection with everyone. But I think it begins with your own particular origins. Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, birthright is defined as a possession.
Right.
Inheritance, in many ways, this work looks at your individual family's history, but enlarges it to think about larger histories of dispossession.
Right. So when my uncle says things like, this is what happened to the people of color, they were abused and defiled and murdered, and they were enslaved, and and yes, horrors, but then there we were, survivors. So that has to be taken into account, and we have to move on from there as survivors somehow.
Yeah, and there's a beautiful moment at the beginning when your uncle said, I didn't think you would come. I was worried you wouldn't come. And it's a really small moment, and I've watched this video so many times, you can miss it. But you're making space for each other,
right,
and making time for each other. You flew to St. Louis from Baltimore.
Right.
And it's a really beautiful and powerful moment for two strangers at that point.
Right. And I felt at home with him immediately.
Yeah.
He and Pauline, I felt like I was so welcomed and embraced. And then he told me all these stories. And we've been close ever since. He passed away, and I attended his, memorial. But I feel incredibly close. I mean, closer to him actually than I did to my dad in many ways, who was very much never revealing anything. Yeah.
So in the interest of time, I'm just going to go to the next slide. Oops.
Oh, here we are.
Work. Doing what we just did. But in a performance. And I think you first staged this performance in 2006 in Paris, which is essentially a year after Birthright. And in some ways I think of these as paired or in conversation, obviously with the newspaper twisting, but also multi-generational connections. So I'd love if you would talk a bit about women's work. It's been staged a number of times, and it really it's a really amazing performance in your practice, and really stands out to me, and I think is in great conversation with Birthright.
Well, women's work, okay. So this kind of thing that's related to the craft of textiles.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I had a degree, my graduate degree was fiber structure. So I was used to thinking about constructing things in a linear kind of fashion, using this and that or whatever. And I decided, and also it started to dawn on me that it was very important to make things together, to be together. And that there was actually a history of like things like quilting bees and things like that. So, so I did this performance, and the first time I did it, it was in Paris. And then the second time I did it, this was a performance show that traveled throughout the United States. And I would go to wherever the show was happening, and I would meet people who were willing to be in a performance with me, and I would teach them how to do it, and we would do it. And we would make, you know, this thing, and we would quietly do it together. There was, you know, and it seemed like an incredible, like really feminine thing to do. And I was happy I was able to do something that simple and that thorough that people could witness. And then at the end of it, we would put them together in a ball, like ball that kind of like what you do with yarn. Once you, you know, have the yarn, you just, and finally, as it progressed, as this show went from city to city, and we did this piece in place to place, finally men began to join us, and it was really, really wonderful. And the last time we did it, which was in San Francisco, my friend Ulysses joined the line.
Ulysses Jenkins?
Yeah.
One of your longtime collaborators.
Right.
From LA. Yeah, I think it's this, it also speaks to your role as a mentor and a teacher. As we have Donna in our audience, one of your former students, and you were such an important mentor to so many younger artists as director of the Reinhardt School of Sculpture in Baltimore. And so again, this kind of intergenerational connection and forms of passing down knowledge that aren't written, aren't on the page, right?
Right.
So I'd love to talk a bit about Birthright, the video, in the context of the National Portrait Gallery, because it will be the basis for the performance next spring, which was of course delayed because of the pandemic. And you came almost a year ago. Now, I can't hardly believe it, for a site visit with myself and Dorothy, and it was the first time you were at the Portrait Gallery. And you know, you said to me, it's like, I don't work in portraiture in the most traditional sense. And I said, I know.
Right.
And so I'm wondering why did it occur to you to bring this work from 15 years ago, from 2005, of course it's been shown more recently, and center it in a new performance at the Portrait Gallery? Why did that make sense to you? And of course, the Portrait Gallery is a national museum of art history and biography. And so how does this work have afterlives in this context?
Well, I think that what I found out by doing it with a lot of different people in different venues is that it is an opportunity to come together and have a conversation.
This is women's work.
Yeah.
Yeah. But why did you think Birthright made sense? The video.
Oh, Birthright. Oh, yeah, Birthright makes perfect sense. It's a photo portrait of a family, you know. It's a contemporary portrait of a family. You know, a lot of your collection is paintings from, you know, the 1700s. So, you know, now we have the ability to make film, you know, make movies. And so that's a portrait.
And I'm curious, thinking about knowledge passing down and inheritance, something I really love about Birthright is that I think it's a kind of a proposition for an alternative or radical methodology of how we tell history. So it's an artwork, but it's also an archive, and you're documenting your uncle's oral history, gestures, small family photographs, speeches, sound, image, this poetic combination of all those elements. And they're almost like the ephemeral materials like newspaper and other materials that you see throughout your practice. And we talked about this, but not recorded in stone or in writing. And of course, it's not linear, it's moving back and forth in time. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about how Birthright engages how it might engage alternative ways of telling history.
Well, one thing about history is usually it's the titans who tell the story. Mm-hmm. And we are the underdogs. And I think we have a story to tell. And that story has to do with survival and spiritual salvation somehow. Amongst all of that and amidst all of that having no history, no name, no purpose, but work, to be owned, to be unnamed, all of this stuff, to still somehow survive. And for anybody who's having any kind of like issues, it's kind of a, I don't know if parable is the right word, but it's kind of a story that can give us all strength, I think.
Yeah, and we've talked about this, but the whole, it's now a business of finding your roots and tracing your ancestry is only a privilege accorded to some, right?
Right.
And your uncle alludes to that in the kind of not being named, not being able to find his father's, knowing about his father's family history, the ways in which chattel slavery, racial capitalism have stolen that ability. So I know we're almost running out of time, and I want to leave time for questions. But here is just two different examples of how newspaper finds its way into Maren's sculptures, not just in the performances in the video. And so I'm particularly interested in Wrenching News. I love this work. And I love the name, Wrenching News, because wrenching is twisted. It's a violent connotation. And I'd love for you to talk a bit about this piece and that title, and the relationship between the form it takes and the title of the work.
Well, I guess I was trying to say that with all the wrenching news, it can have a positive ending. And that ending can be this art in the form of these two mandalas, one on the floor and one on the wall. And it doesn't have to be, it's not hopeless. So this is about hope, I guess.
And I just want to leave time. It's a beautiful installation of the veil between us, but you can also see that's one of your wire rope sculptural pieces
right.
in the foreground,
yeah.
Which of course has a twisting aspect to it as well.
A dancing one too.
Exactly. And this is at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Some of you may have been able to catch that show in 2018. And then finally, because you will be installing Monument next weekend in DC,
right,
near Dupont Circle. This was a piece that was commissioned, as Dorothy mentioned, by the Studio Museum in Harlem, and that installed at Marcus Garvey Park. And this time around, you and a group of socially distanced volunteers will be installing it from branches of a willow tree that needed to come down, a willow tree in DC. And I texted you last week because when we found that out, I really it kind of took my breath away because you talk about the willows with your uncle at the end of Birthright. And, you know, that to me, we both said, we don't believe in coincidences. And it's this really beautiful connection between these two seemingly disparate pieces. So it'll be your first, if you can believe it, solo presentation in DC. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about this material of trees, tree branches. That's not the material we're used to seeing in public sculpture of bronze or marble that conveys this sense of solidity and permanence in both the physical sense, but also in terms of meaning. And so I'm wondering, this piece is very site responsive, and I'm wondering how you can talk about the similarities and shifts in meaning between 2018, when it was installed in Harlem, and 2020 in Washington, DC, and how it is site responsive even as it iterates on a previous installation.
Yeah, okay. There were 8 pieces in Garvey Park, and they were all made with branches from the local area of New York. And each of them was placed in relationship to an area in the park that it was supposed to explicate. Like, this is at a major corner in the park, and it's a corner.
Okay.
When it is going to be put in the new relationship in DC, it is still related to the idea that we have to honor nature, our beginning, and how it is imperiled. It's to call attention to the imperiled part. And it also, though, because of the way it's positioned at the site, it makes you look off into the distance at the horizon, which, you know, is the kind of really hopeful, expansive part of what the sculpture can mean. And I'm always very, very worried that we have forgotten about nature entirely. I mean, everything we do it feels like we're trying to destroy it purposefully. These are reminders that it's important, and it has its strength, and it has its beauty, and it has its serenity.
Yeah, it's a remarkable monument because, like I said, it's not a man on a horse.
Right.
It's made of bronze or marble, and in this particular moment when many monuments are being questioned or taken down as monuments to white supremacy and with history steeped in racial terrorism and violence, this is a very different kind of offering.
And one which we can all share,
right,
think about, and I hope contribute to the health of the continuing health or ongoing health of the awareness of nature, and that we are animals of nature. Yeah.
Well, Maren, is there anything else you'd like to add before we open it up to Q&A? And I will monitor the Q&A function and read aloud the questions to you. Is there anything you want to add before we move on?
Well, I mean, in conclusion, I'm just trying hard to express how I feel that we are all related in a world that is natural. So that's the deal. That's what my practice has become. Yeah.
Yeah, and I should say, I mean, you just to go back, but the wire ropes are, you know, an industrial, a man-made material that is approximating nature, and that kind of slippage is really important. And then, of course, newspaper is derived from trees.
Right.
So I see a bunch of questions and I want to leave some time for them. Okay, I did make a mistake. I twisted too many. I twisted all of them at once, and a very kind attendee told me to only twist it one at a time, but there you go.
Well, I did. I did it one at a time, and it came out to be a nice little sphere.
I did not, so I only have this, but I have plenty of newspaper left.
Okay. Well, there's always plenty of newspaper everywhere. So
yes. So I'd like to go to Donna Conlon, who, of course, we mentioned, is an artist and filmmaker, wonderful artist and filmmaker, and one of Maren's students, and was behind the camera for Birthright. So it's really special that she could be here. She says, just a comment, I'm glad you mentioned Maren's role as a mentor. It is a powerful thing to break the chain of legacies of being unloved, which she has done with her own family through her loving relationship with her children. And her role has been similar in the art world, which has its own history of inequality through her supportive mentoring of her students, especially important to women and women of color. Thank you, Maren.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Donna. Yeah, I appreciate that because I know you know what you're talking about. Yeah. She's gifted. Donna's a gifted person.
Yeah. And I should say, I think one of your former students from Micah, who works at Smithsonian now, will also be helping install, signed up for a volunteer shift.
Oh, great. Okay.
And said what a wonderful teacher and mentor you are. This kind of legacy of caring for your students. And of course, you know, you see Ava and Jesse in the video, and you collaborate with Ava pretty frequently. So that's a beautiful comment. Thank you so much, Donna. I have a question. Once the newspapers are twisted and tied together, what then? That's a great question.
Then you can do whatever you want with it. I mean, you could make, you could go on and make row after row after row in a very deep curtain. You could make a curtain that was this thick, you know, if you wanted to. Or you could make a ball this big. I mean, it's up to you what you wanted to make. You could put it across the ceiling and have it drip down. You could do a million things. That would be your choice.
Mm-hmm. Also, what should we do with our new twisted strands? I love this exercise as a way to unite us while listening and watching this conversation. Thank you. So Maren made some suggestions.
Yeah, you can do whatever. Yeah.
I'm going to keep it away from my dog.
Right.
It causes all sorts of trouble. Where in DC will Monument be installed? So from my understanding, it will be on the Connecticut Avenue overpass in Dupont, and it will be up for a very long time. So if you can't, you know, I'm going to stop by to social distance and say hi and watch it being installed. But if you can't make it next weekend to watch it being installed, it will be up for a long time. So there will be plenty of opportunities to see it. And I also want to not only just thank the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative, but the Golden Triangle bid for supporting this incredible project in Dupont.
Oh, and incidentally, one of the men who built the armature that is supporting the branches was my student, Stephen from Micah. So thank you, Stephen.
That's lovely. You have a very devoted group of former students.
Yeah, and talented. Yeah, talented.
No kidding. We have another former student. This is so wonderful. Brenda. She says, hi, Maren, former student of Maren's here as well. Would you speak to the impermanence of some of the materials that you work with? Does it have particular meaning in your works? That's a great question.
Well, sometimes things are, you feel that things are fragile or they won't last or whatever. But these branches will last forever. I mean, and they're going to be easily replaced if they start shredding up or something, but I've never known them to do that. Mm-hmm. Also, the thing about paper, I mean, as long as it's protected indoors, I mean, what's going to happen to it? Plastic, we know, it's a problem. I mean, it won't go away to save its life. So most things, we're just used to the idea of welding steel or casting bronze. But there are many materials that will last a long time without being highly toxic or really expensive, or that you have to have, like special expertise to deal with, But that's really a hard thing to learn as a, student of sculpture, because you're always, kind of, oh, let's weld this, kind of thing.
Right. Again, you're showing your relationship to minimalism and its alternatives.
Right.
But you do also work with, leaves, breath, right?
Say that again.
You've worked with leaves. You've worked with your own breath. You've taken trash and dyed it pink and put it back where you found it.
Right.
So there is a kind of built-in ephemerality to some of your work, which is quite beautiful. It shows that artworks have change and have a life. Like Monument will change and have a new life in DC, or Birthright will have a new life in the performance or in this Zoom.
Right.
So it shows the kind of that artworks have the capacity to change.
They have the capacity to change, and they also have the capacity to change things and minds and hearts.
That's why we're doing this, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's why we're doing it. That's the heavy lifting, right?
Some other great questions, and I know you'll like this one, Maren. Is there a symbolic connection between the twist and their resemblance to an umbilical cord and a spiritual mothering relationship? So yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely, there is. When I was giving birth to Ava, it was midwives. I always had midwives, and I saw the umbilical cord, and it looked like a piece of galvanized wire rope, which I had used a lot up until that time. And the coils inside looked like the wire rope, and the outer coil was like, the covering was a membrane. But you could see through the membrane to the inner coil. Mm. And I thought at the time, oh, I'm on the right track. That's what I thought. Mm. I mean, I was using something that was so elemental that we all know about it. We may have forgotten about it, but we all know it. It's a familiar twist. Mm. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions. So how did Maren discover or begin this act of twisting newspaper? Did she discover by chance that she could create art in this way, or was it an action that came naturally and developed over time?
I think, it was kind of a little bit of both, but I think that I had been doing a lot of work with rope, and I saw that how rope and wire rope were twisted for strength and flexibility also. So I don't know, I guess I just thought I would do my own twist thing and see what happened. And that's what happened. Yeah.
And a question, were the sit-upons, where the sit-upons at the BMA, the Baltimore Museum of Art?
Where were they?
Were they there?
Oh yeah, they were there. I believe they were put in front of some videos that were in the central room.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see my mother has asked a question, but I can, set one later. Since in the interest of time, I think
she's going to be angry.
No. So one last question about the newspaper twist. Is there a connection for you to Black hair?
Black hair. Is the newspaper twisting related to African-American hair?
For you.
For me.
In your practice, in your thinking.
Well, I think it is related to this thing that people do with their hair,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's straight or kinky hair.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like a nervous habit or thinking.
Well, I think these linear elements that can be manipulated, I think they are related to hair,
Mm-hmm.
in that sense. But whether it's specifically, do I think about African-American hair? I'm not sure. I think I really think of umbilical cords more than anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much, Maren. It's always a pleasure to be able to speak with you. And thank you.
It's been quite lovely.
It's completely lovely. And I so appreciate you sharing the video with us. This conversation will be recorded, so you can access the conversation on the American Women's History Initiative website. And we did get a question about the date for the performance. It has been rescheduled for May 16th, 2021 at the Portrait Gallery. And if you sign up for the Portrait Gallery's newsletter, we should have more information much closer to the date about specific timing. But for right now, we're hoping that will be when we can all come together again.
Yeah, I really look forward to it. Yeah.
Yes, we've had several reschedules, and I think it'll be a really wonderful moment. And I should say that I started collecting newspapers in January at my desk.
Oh my goodness.
And so I think it'll be interesting to see the way in which the world has dramatically changed from when I first collected the newspapers in January and May of next year.
Right.
So thank you everyone for coming together tonight. We're so appreciative. Thank you again to the National Portrait Gallery and the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative and all our colleagues behind the scenes who have worked with us to make this so smooth. And again, to Maren. And please come visit Dupont Circle when you have a chance and come to the Portrait Gallery next May. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Really, it was my pleasure.
Bye, Maren.
Bye.